We all know that sheep are a symbol of Wales for people all over the world, and sheep farming has long been practiced in Wales, but especially before agriculture and travel were mechanized in the 19th century and earlier, a whole host of animals were integral to everyday life. So today we're going to talk about how learning about our ancestors' animals can tell us more about them as people. Welcome to GenealCymru, my name is Di, and let's look at some animals. Here's a photograph from around 1910 of some people sitting in the shade of a farm building to shear their sheep somewhere in Merionethshire. For much of the year, their sheep were kept up on the mountain to graze and roam free on the sheep walk, until around May and June when they needed to be herded down, washed in deep flowing water, sheared, and marked to show who owned them. There's this annual rhythm to life centered around maintaining the flock, and these rhythms were infused into our ancestors' bodies. It's like that feeling of something being like second nature, a yearly rhythm of them going up and down the mountain to care for their flock. They made their preparations for the shearing. The community came together to get the work done. At shearing time, there's this immediate rhythm of the open and close of the clippers pressed close to the skin to get a good fleece that would sell at market. The rhythm of setting the fleece down and bundling it up for transport. This is all knowledge that our sheep farming ancestors carried around with them, and something that many of them would have learned from a young age. Sheep farmers also had deep knowledge of property boundaries on the unenclosed land that their sheep roamed. In some parts of Wales, much of the land, including the sheep walks, wasn't divided by walls, hedges, or fences until at least the late 1800s. Often the farmers would learn from their elders, as Thomas Jones explains in 1894. The oldest shepherd is asked where the boundary is. He walks from rill to rock, from rock to hollow, from hollow to a patch of rushes, and thence to a haunted glen. This was important cultural knowledge that got passed down the generations to help life function in a rural farming community. As well as they knew the land, with no fences, thousands of roaming sheep, and a system of land use rights and tenancy, you get what David Lloyd of Llanddewi Brefi, my 5 times great-grandmother's brother, explained in the newspaper in 1877. Sheep used to be turned out as well as ponies on the sheep walk. Other sheep came occasionally from neighbors whose lands abutted mine. When they did so, I drove them back. I tried so far as I could to keep my own sheep within my own boundaries, but I could not do it. Other people used to drive my sheep back in the same way as I did theirs. Together with just his mother and brother, David Lloyd's family owned about 1,000 sheep. So you have these communities where there's a massive sheep farming industry with a mutual understanding that the sheep will wander, but that also know the boundaries of the land and do their best to maintain their own land and rights. Of course, there was the option to impound sheep that crossed into land where they didn't belong and charge the owner. Sometimes that was done, and local rivalries and feuds might follow. Accounts like David Lloyd's survive because the expertise of the livestock farmers was sometimes used by the courts. When disputes happened around enclosing the commons, it was these farmers who were called on to tell the history of the land and its use. One thing I like to think about with my farming ancestors is the impact of the Great Agricultural Depression of the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. And how it pushed many of those ancestors toward work in industrial towns. Imagine how disorienting it might have been to have those daily and yearly rhythms and connections to the land severed. How might that have shown up in how our ancestors moved through the world? It just opens up so many new questions to research. As we continue on, let me know down in the comments what kind of animals your ancestors kept. Because it's not just sheep that impacted our ancestors' lives like this. You'll find horses were a constant feature of society across the centuries. If we look at an 1863 map of railways in Wales, you can see that the coverage is most dense in the south, where the coal and metal industries were most developed, some lines in the north, and one right through central Wales. But in many parts of the country, if you're traveling, you're either walking or using a horse trap. Also, when it comes to agriculture, it was horses who were plowing the fields and transporting goods. And right up to the year 1900, there were still around 1 million working horses across Britain. But not long after that, they were mostly replaced by new powered machines. The earliest mention of horses amongst my ancestors is in the will of one of my 11 times great-grandfathers, Griffith John Lloyd of Bettws Bledrws in Cardiganshire. He was a gentleman and owned 3 mares and a colt on his death in 1666. Horses were expensive to buy and maintain, and among the wealthy and the landowning classes, you'll also find that horses were used as prestige animals. Here's a picture of my ancestor Jenkins with one of the many horses he bred. This horse's name was Nansor Glyn, and she was his most successful racing horse. Born in 1891, by the age of 12, she had raced in 268 races, placing first, second, and third in all but 8. Those racing events are great because they leave a paper trail. Many of them happened as part of local agricultural society events. These agricultural societies were founded in the 18th and 19th centuries as a place where landowning gentlemen could work on improving produce yields and livestock breeds, develop and apply new scientific approaches to farming, and promote their own vision of a prosperous agricultural community. They also held events where the larger community would come together to show their livestock and produce and compete for prizes, and the results of these competitions were celebrated in the newspapers. But these agricultural shows weren't just about farming. They were about socializing as part of a larger community. It was one of those places where people made friends and even met their future spouses. So our ancestors' animals don't just tell us about them as individuals, but they can show us the kinds of communities that they were a part of. And when you're researching your ancestors' communities, you're doing the best kind of genealogical research. I'd really encourage you to try this out with your ancestors. Figure out what kinds of animals they interacted with on a daily basis, and then ask what kind of knowledge and what kinds of rhythms would they have had to develop. How would it have brought them into different sorts of communities, and how might those animals indicate the kinds of status your ancestors had in the community? And if you're looking for other creative ways to think about our ancestors' lives, check out this video about how to look at our ancestors' homes. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and a comment. Thanks for watching.